I'm covering the 4 most popular legends in all of Apex and explaining how most players are using them incorrectly. So let's get into it. Surprisingly, Octane has the highest pick rate currently among all of the legends in Apex Season 14. So let's start out with the most common mistakes most Octane players make. First has got to be stimming too much, resulting in them being lower on health than they really need to be. Octane's tactical is sort of problematic because yes, it is fun to go fast and it's on a very short cooldown, so short in fact that you can just keep spamming it to keep going faster, but you'll need to use your discretion here. Because stimming into fights for no real reason except for you can is often going to be a huge oversight. You go into the beginning of the fight lower on HP, but you'll also be typically way ahead of your squad mates. Remember, Apex is often a game of the small things, so even if you're 10 to 15 feet ahead of your mates, but you're running into multiple enemies' lines of sight, it could result in a quick death for you. However, if you're stimming at an enemy because you know they're low or way out of position and you feel like by catching up to them, you will have an advantage over them, then obviously this is how you want to be using it. Stimming away from enemies is also a viable strategy, but only if you need to cover a few meters to reach some available cover and cut off the enemy's angle on you. Some players also like to stim strafe, meaning they stim while fighting up close to try to make themselves a harder target to hit. This is particularly helpful with pistols or SMGs, which have a bit faster strafe speed, but once again should only be used cautiously because you never want to take more damage than you need to. Alright, so now you've mastered his stim, but what about his jump pad? Well, this ability is a pretty solid ultimate for not only Octane, but his teammates too. The obvious common mistakes I see are a lack of understanding around when and where to be using it. I think a lot of players are going to be like, well, this is obvious, and sure, it may be obvious to you, but from what I see daily while playing this game with randoms, is that most people screw up the when and where on abilities. Octane's pad should be used to close the distance between you and the opposing team, but preferably it's done so that the enemies can't just light you up in the air while you're flying towards them. So you have to consider things like line of sight when launching on the jump pad. You don't want to be full sending on the pad alone into a team either. Try to have your mates take it within a couple seconds of each other, because this way it's going to be much more oppressive for the enemy team to deal with you. Focusing on shooting 3 different people at the same time but all with different trajectories is no easy feat. Most players are also aware that stimming doesn't make you go further on the jump pad, but it can obviously help you reach the pad quicker. Tap strafing on the jump pad is where there's a huge skill gap, and since I'm a controller player that doesn't use Steam configs because they're technically against EA's terms of service, I can't do it. But learning to utilize tap strafing on the pad will obviously make you a much harder target to follow and therefore shoot at. If you play on mouse and keyboard, then I highly suggest you learn how to tap strafe on an Octane pad. This will create a huge layer of skill for you, and it will just make this ability a much better asset to your team. In conclusion, Octane is a straightforward, aggressive legend and should be used that way, but use your brain around when to be aggressive with his abilities. The second most picked legend this season is Pathfinder. This one honestly surprises me a bit given how large his hitbox is and the skill gap that he requires, but regardless, let's get into some of the common mistakes centering around his abilities. First thing you should know is his grapple hook has a variable cooldown, meaning the better of a grapple you hit in terms of distance, the longer of a cooldown you will have until it's available again. The longest the cooldown can be is upwards of half a minute, and the shortest it can be is I think around 10 seconds. Now I always discuss how Path is the most fun legend to use, and that's because you can utilize so many different variations of his grapple. In most instances, learning to press jump right when the grapple connects will fling you higher and further over whatever is in front of you. But this isn't always necessary, especially if you're grappling something that's above you. If you're trying to grapple a roof or take high ground, you don't always need to press jump. You can in certain instances, depending on the angle of it, but for most grapples, it's more about your momentum and swing or sweep of it when you're trying to take height. Grappling into teams without any prior opening to the fight is a big no-no, and this is a huge mistake players make. They get a little overzealous with this ability at times. If you do so, you will isolate yourself ahead of your teammates and be fully committed in that fight because your ability will be on cooldown and this could get bad fast for you. Also, as I mentioned previously, Pathfinder does have a huge hitbox. This results in him taking way more damage and thus dying faster than most of the other legends, if not all of them. So putting yourself in any potential disadvantaged fight is not going to go well. The best Pathfinders are really good at capitalizing off of damage. So if you or one of your teammates gets a crack in the armor, grappling in and securing that knock could be a great strategy. Most enemies will not be able to stop this because it's happening so fast, and if the Pathfinder executes it well, it's insanely hard to counter. Pathfinder is great at what we call being an entry fragger. Because of his mobility, he should be used to initiate a lot of damage and hopefully secure a down or two during the fight. I strongly recommend going into the firing range and just practicing with his grapple. Think about how you would want to reach a certain point or angle if you were going to be utilizing the grapple, so try it with pressing jump if you're grappling something in front of you or the ground. But if you're trying to go above onto a roof or something like that, practice how that grapple works as well. A lot of it will center around how you move your joystick or your mouse in the direction in which you want to land on. But Pathfinder also obviously has a zip line, so what are some common mistakes with this one? Well, this one's also pretty straightforward. You never want to zipline in blatant line of sight of your enemies, as you'll just be too easy of a target for them to beam. You can only interact with the zipline 3 times, so that means you can jump up and down on the zip to avoid taking damage if you're being shot at, but only a few times before it'll kick you off. Pathfinder ziplines are also much straighter than the map-made ziplines, which also makes it easier for enemies to track. If an enemy has high ground over you, try to get underneath them and shoot a vertical zipline to seize their high ground. This will often surprise your enemies, especially if they don't know you're below them. But even if they do, it's going to be really hard for enemies to shoot straight down on you, so this play can work out particularly well if you and your teammates take the zip, but then you break off before the end of the zip line to grapple up and create 2 different mechanisms for your team to reach that high ground. The third most picked legend is Wraith, so let's start off with her tactical, the Phase Walk. Lots of Wraiths use her tactical in some great ways, but then there are some who use it when it's only a few seconds too late. There's a pretty small margin of error on this one because it takes 1.25 seconds to activate, which doesn't sound like a lot of time, but during a fight it really is. So you need to use it when you get low and there's a need to reposition, but just slightly. This is not a macro repositioning tool. If you overcommit too much and take a significant amount of damage, it's highly likely for enemies to just trail you as you come out of your queue and kill you shortly after. However, you can also use it if you're taking an overly aggressive angle on a team while utilizing some cover. But then, when that angle is no longer as useful, you can queue back to your squad mates. This is how a lot of pros have used Wraith in ALGS and high-level ranked games. But you cannot be using this ability like it's some get-out-of-jail-free card, because it's certainly not. What I often do is I'll utilize a jump or a crouch as I'm activating the phase if I'm being shot at, so that I'm not just standing there if I'm in line of sight to my enemies. Be careful though, because if you jump and bump into something like a wall, it will cancel your tactical. Respawn said they fixed this back in Season 9, but they never actually did. When you're using your tactical, always have an idea of where your enemies are so that you can assess a potential safe spot to retreat to. Map awareness is a vital factor in gauging this. Now let's move on to Wraith's Portal, because this is where a lot of players tend to mess up. This ability is very nuanced, meaning subtle and small variables will affect its utility during each match. The first thing you should know is that it has a ridiculously long cooldown for what it is. It's a 3.5 minute cooldown to be exact. This means that it could have a pretty high risk for you and your team if you screw it up. Now, to put it simply, you want to be using this on either offense or defense. Let's start with offense. If you're portaling towards a team, it should be so that you guys can develop a more favorable angle by getting closer to your enemy. I always try to start and end the portal behind some piece of cover. This way, it will prevent us from taking damage on the approach or the potential retreat. This won't always be possible, but keep it in mind when you're activating the portal and you're watching the rift energy dwindle down. This essentially means that the distance you can travel is getting less and less. The portal can reach up to 75 meters, which is not that long in the grand scheme of things, so you have to keep this in mind when you're portaling. If I'm trying to gauge how far away something is, I always ping it first to reflect on my map how many meters away it is. If I need to get closer because it's more than 75 meters, I always assess if that is possible. If you're playing on the defensive end, however, and you have to portal away because let's say one of your teammates got knocked, well, you'll still want to place the portal behind some cover so that the enemies have to think twice before they take it and chase you down. Now, they most likely will chase through the portal, especially if they got one knocked. So think about setting a trap for them. You can throw grenades at the portal so that when they come through, they could walk straight into them. You could get behind some cover and pre-aim the portal so that when you get the audio and visual cue that someone's coming through, you're gonna light them up. Or you could stand behind the portal and shoot them in the back as they try to pour through. Keep in mind that if you use your tactical and then shortly after you find the need to use your portal, you could have screwed yourself. It's best to combo these abilities whenever possible so that you get a quicker activation of the ability and so that you can portal while being invincible for a short period of time. Wraith's portal has a ton of outplay attached to it, but it will be difficult to use during the early stages of your Apex career. So my best advice is just get used to placing it and pay attention to what worked and what didn't when you used it. The fourth most picked legend in Season 14 is Horizon, and I'm sure that most of you could have guessed she would be on this list. Given how Valkyrie received some nerfs at the beginning of this season, which I guess winded up making Horizon a bit more popular among the player base. Now, I will say out of all of the legends on this list, she is played the best by the average player in my eyes. It could just be because of the simplicity of her kit, or just because she's not as nuanced as the others, I'm not really sure. But let's start off with her gravity lift. This ability is really strong, and I like to look at it as medium risk and high reward. She is the only legend in the game with a mobility tactical that can navigate her whole squad. Using the gravity lift to seize high ground from opponents is an obvious option when playing Horizon, but just the sheer ability to fly up in the air during any gunfight can create a significant advantage over your opponents, especially because you can shoot while using it, and this is a very unique aspect. You want to be mindful of when and where you place this. If you do it too exposed, a good player will have a fairly easy time tracking you as you rise up the lift, often resulting in you taking a significant amount of damage before you reach the top, and now you're going to be playing on your heels. When this ability performs well, I think it's centered around the whole team taking it by sort of a one-by-one approach. Similar to Octane's jump pad, it would be a lot for enemy teams to deal with 3 players rising vertically and flying onto them. But if all 3 of you take it together, it will be very unsuccessful because collision will occur with bullets and or any other abilities. So be careful with this as you go about utilizing it. Try to pace it out so that you can take it all within a few seconds of one another. You can also use your tactical to block doorways if you need to stall and buy time to heal, but this is very situational, and remember that this ability lasts for only 10 seconds. But it has a 20-second cooldown, and that cooldown doesn't begin until the gravity lift goes away. So if you take the lift only once, it's really like having a 30-second cooldown, and you can only stay on the gravity lift for 3 seconds before it will kick you off. Horizon is another legend that could be looked at as an entry fragger. If you use her gravity lift to get an alternate angle on your opponents while your teammates are split off and working their own angles, it could be a very successful way to take out an enemy squad. But it is a double-edged sword, because if you're getting focused as you rise up the lift, it's much easier for them to be shooting you as you're rising than it is for you to be shooting them in most instances. Horizon's tactical and ultimate will pair extremely well together in most games when you need a solid angle to place the black hole. How do players screw this ability up though? Well, a lot of you know to pair it with grenades or other damage dealing abilities like a caustical or fuse's tactical, but if you do throw nades with it, remember that they will now destroy the ultimate if the ult takes 150 damage. So playing off of the damage the nades do to the enemies even quicker than before is critical. A lot of higher level ranked players will use this ability to pull players through walls or doors, as it works through all geo on the map if a player was in the radius of it. You don't need grenades for this ability to be successful, because this won't pull Horizon as much as it does to enemies, so you can simply mess up their aim or pull them into an even better angle for you to just use your gunplay to secure the kill on them. Or even better, if they waste time shooting the ult, you can use that brief window to just shoot the opponent, because, well, obviously their bullets are going into the ult and they will at least have to reload 1 if not 2 of their weapons. It's crazy to me to think what Horizon was like 7 seasons ago upon release. She's received plenty of nerfs since then, and she's still a top picked legend. If you didn't know what she was like in Season 7, then you either missed out on an incredibly fun or annoying time to be playing Apex. All of that depends on if you were playing as her or going up against her. So now you know how to play the most popular legends in Apex. Well, I hope you'll take what you learned and apply it to your ranked grind. If you're interested in reaching Diamond or even Master's rank, check out these videos next. Thanks for watching. Peace.